Actually, yes, I met them last year. They were doing some stories on hair.
Okay.
Yes.
Shall we begin?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Salman Hussain. That's Leonardo Moyes. Tina. We're with the UWM BLC Field School. Just surveying the neighborhood, getting the voices of residents and stories of houses and how they interact with their houses, their own life histories, and how they interact with the neighborhood itself. So the first thing we have is if you could introduce yourself, your name, and we're gonna have the recording go up on the website, or chunks of it. So if you could speak in full sentences in response to if a question, like if I ask what's your name and you say only Dave Johnson, what's your name is not going to be in the recording.
Okay. So I'm David Johnson. So what else do you want me to
Where do
say?
you live?
Okay. I currently live on 44th Street in the Martin Drive neighborhood. So just what would that be? South of the park.
Okay. And we have this consent form, which I would like it if you could fill it out and sign it for us,
Okay.
which is basically that you consent to this interview and for the recording to be publicly available. And if there is any segment from the interview that you don't want made public, you could let us know and we'll just take it out.
Okay.
This one is for the recording. And, this is great. Thank you so much. So to begin, I would like to first thank you very much for your time. And
You're welcome.
I've got a busy schedule, and we really appreciate that you're helping us with this project by talking to us. So basically, we're interested in the stories. So if you want to tell us, a story that describes, your life or certain part of your life or something about the neighbors of the neighborhood, please feel free to share in as much length as you'd like.
Okay.
So let's start off with, were you born and raised in this neighborhood, or if you moved here, what brought you here? Where did you move from? What kept you here? What do you do? That kind of life history.
Let's see. Well, I was born in Gary, Indiana in 1966, November. My parents moved to Milwaukee, I want to say around May of 1967. So I wasn't born here, but I was raised here. My parents tell me I was kicking and screaming as they were leaving Gary, Indiana, but I don't think it had to do with anything that we were actually leaving Gary. So this is, they lived in a couple places in Milwaukee before settling on 33rd and State, which is hop, skip, and a jump away from the park. So this is home territory for me. It's the part of town that I grew up in. Definitely have fond memories of Washington Park. And then as I grew older, I lived in other parts of the city, and then I got an opportunity to buy a house back in Martin Drive, and then I jumped at it. So that's how I ended up here.
What do you do for like a living?
That's a tricky question.
How do you-
I'm still trying to figure that out.
Okay.
How do I make a living at what I do? I'm involved in a lot of things. Primarily, I am a full-time student at UWM in the School of Architecture and Urban Planning, getting a master's in urban planning and developing my own concentration in the design of urban food systems. And then along with that, I also make a little money as a project manager, although the official term is focalizer, but there's a really long story behind that term. So, of a group called the Community Food Systems Work Group, which is part of a larger initiative called the Greater Milwaukee Sustainable Conscious Community Initiative, being sponsored by an organization called the High Wind Association in Plymouth, Wisconsin. The goal of the initiative is to help facilitate a paradigm shift in the Milwaukee area around living a sustainable life. So not just to raise awareness about sustainability, but to actually move people towards living sustainable lives. That initiative is divided into 11 different themes, one of which is food production and consumption, which is the group that I'm heading up. I am also, let's see, what else am I involved in? Another money-making enterprise for myself is that I've started my own farm this growing season here in 2014. And it's called Cream City Farms, and I've got 2 sites that I have working with the UW Extension, Cooperative Extension. And then I'm working on securing a 3rd site right next to Amaranth Bakery on 33rd in Lisbon. And that's been an interesting journey as well to bring that to life. So a lot of support around getting the project to happen, but the technical stuff is and the bureaucracy that we've got to wade through to get it to happen has been pretty much a nightmare. But it's worth it, because once I get through it, hopefully the people who follow me won't have to go through the same kinks and curves that I did.
So when you said there's a lot of support, did you mean from the community?
Yeah, from I'll say specifically from community organizations. So this site on 33rd in Lisbon would also be, I'd also be working with UW Extension on that one. They would be the primary leaseholder with the city for the 2 corners. So we're looking at both corners, southwest and northwest corner of that intersection. And then, so in addition to my growing operations, there will also be a Lots of Flowers program that UW Extension is trying to launch. So where we're growing cut flowers for production and sales. And that portion of it would be coordinated and managed by students and kids from the neighborhood who are part of our next generation. So they'll come in, manage, maintain that part of the program, and then I'll supervise them in that process through an arrangement with Washington Park Partners and United Methodist Children's Services, because they want me to serve as a farmer in residence to Washington Park Partners, which would then also entail me teaching classes to area residents on gardening. Good. And then Dave from Amaranth is also highly supportive of the project as well.
Okay. So you mentioned you will be teaching classes to the community kids. Could you talk a little bit about the needs that you see these projects serving the community needs,
Okay.
and what your understanding of the community needs of this area is what do you think people have here or don't have here or should have here
Okay.
that they don't?
Okay. I don't know that I'm qualified to really speak to the needs of local residents here in Washington Park Partners or Washington Park area, but just the overall market trend, which is why I've really gotten focused on food and food issues, is that we're going to have to grow our food locally. As you can see with this summer, gas prices are nearing that magic threshold of $4 a gallon for the cheapest gas that you can buy. That is a psychological threshold that I can tell you no politician wants to see us cross. But market forces are such that if it doesn't happen this year, it's probably going to happen sooner than later. And as we get to that point, I don't know what the magic number is, but at some point gas prices are going to be too high for us to ship our food from California, let alone halfway across the world. So we by necessity, communities are going to have to learn how to grow their food locally. And it's important to me. So in that, there is going to be a lot of economic opportunity. And I want to make sure that low-income households are positioned and poised to take advantage of that trend as any other person would. And so that's what drives me in that process. And then if there's an opportunity for those folks who want to learn how to grow their food to be more self-sufficient, to improve their own diets, which is something that I think probably, just it doesn't really matter who you are, you can benefit from that knowledge.
So, this is incredibly insightful in terms of your foresight that oil prices might make it such that we will be, or people here will be forced to grow food locally. I just did walk around Vox Pop, kind of talking to people about food. And some other interviews have mentioned that there is something of I'm basically thinking of the term food desert. If you could say something about whether or not this neighborhood can be described as that, or what the food situation at present is.
There's a lot of ways of defining what a food desert is. I think the definition that I use is the most basic one, which is if you have to travel more than a mile to purchase fresh produce. And it needs to be fresh produce from a supplier that can supply it significantly. There are some corner stores that will have fresh produce in that, but I don't really consider that alleviating what a food desert is. And what I like about that definition is that puts the majority of Americans and communities in a food desert. A lot of people, some folks will add to the definition that, you also have to lack the means to be able to drive to a grocery store. But, the way I look at it is that, driving takes time. And if people if they had a choice of only traveling 2 minutes to get to a grocery store versus 15 minutes, they would choose 2 minutes. So all of us, most of us live in a food desert, whether you're in the heart of the city or you're out in the suburbs. And that should concern everybody. Even if you have the means to get to a grocery store, it's still time consuming, and that's time that could be better spent with your family. Let's see what else. And I think what's also important is the quality of the food sources that are available. I think it's also important to understand uh, the types of restaurants that are in a neighborhood are as critical to the health of that neighborhood as a full-service grocery store with fresh produce.
So just to shift the conversation slightly from food.
Sure.
Well, actually, not really away from food. But,
Okay.
Is there any? I mean, you've discussed your own projects. Are there other people pursuing the same kind of projects? Is there organizations or collectives of people coming together? You mentioned Dave supports Dave from Amaranth Bakery supports your venture. Are there other stories that you could tell us of, if you and probably Dave are the only one pursuing these, or if there are other people in the community who are starting up on alleviating the food desert issue?
Okay.
Or if they're just simply talking about it?
Yeah, Milwaukee is really doing some amazing work. There are a lot of food activists in Milwaukee. I don't know. I can't tell you how many are in the Washington Park area, but there's an awareness in Milwaukee that is pretty amazing and inspiring. And you look at the work that Victory Garden Initiative has done with getting people to install gardens in either their front yard or their backyard to grow food. And I know that they've installed a significant number of raised beds in the Washington Park area within the past couple of years. So I think that's a great thing that's happening. I still don't know. For me, it's I want to see stuff happen across the board. I'm not necessarily saying everything has to be focused on low-income households, but whatever happens, low-income houses have to be included. And I like initiatives that come at it that makes it possible for everybody to participate. And I think that helps folks, because when we focus solely, all of our programs are, if they're focused solely on low-income households, there's a psychology that we start to breed in households, and that sense of dependency. And when it's important to live in community, so that the service that you're partaking in, as a low-income household, it's the same service that a higher income household is taking. You know that you're part of the same community as that household. And so those are the programs that I like to see happen and put in place. Others that are working on this would be the Urban Ecology Center. They're doing some great work with the creation of the food forest in Washington Park itself. Is something that comes at that. The neighborhood associations, I think, are doing good work. Not that I can speak to some specific things that they've done. And I think the business improvement districts that are in the area are working very hard to make sure that there are quality food enterprises in our area.
So there's something that you mentioned about programs not being focused solely on low-income households, that if the program serves low-income households and everybody else, it creates a sense of
community. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about what you see at present that might be like dividing community, basically, to use an academic term, I'm talking about class tensions or other kinds of tensions that may exist or discord that may exist in the community that you've noticed or observed or thought about?
I don't know that I can speak to anything specific that is creating a barrier and a division in the area at the moment. Yeah, I can't think of anything at the moment right now, but if it comes to me, I'll bring it up later.
So in our interviews, some folks have mentioned that the ethnic and racial makeup of the neighborhood has changed
Mm-hmm.
over the decades, and that now there are more Hispanic and Hmong households in the neighborhood than once
Okay.
used to be. How is that going as far as neighborhood relations are concerned that you would be aware of or may have perceived, observed, thought about?
Okay. I can't think of anything that's specific to that. I know that the neighborhood that I grew up in over on 33rd and State when we were there, we were probably just one of 2 or 3 African American households in the area, or at least in that particular 2-block area between 33rd Street, 35th Street, and from State Street to Wells Street. But over, it's now probably predominantly African American in the neighborhood, certainly a much stronger mix. And I don't think there's been any deterioration in relations. I think the folks, it's still majority homeowner owned neighborhood, even though I don't live in that part of town anymore. And where I currently live is probably majority owner occupied. So I can't, there's nothing that I have witnessed personally, nor has anyone shared stories with me about racial tensions in the neighborhood. And actually, let me correct myself, because I hate the term race and racial ethnic tensions, because there's only one race, and that's the human race.
I also wanted to ask you about new residents that might be coming in.
Okay.
Actually, I'll tell you what's at the back of my head.
Okay.
I'm thinking of the term gentrification.
Okay.
Do you see any of that dynamic happening, that folks from other part of Milwaukee buying in this area properties to later flip them, or whatever goes on with gentrification?
Okay.
Or what are your views of people buying into this area because land might be cheap or houses might be cheap, and then
Okay.
you know how the rest of the story goes?
Yeah. I don't know that I've witnessed much gentrification happening in the area, but I've never even though I grew up in this part of town, probably this east side of the park is the one that I'm least familiar with. And when I was little, it was what part of town that I avoided, and the part of the neighborhood that I avoided. So I don't really know a whole lot about what the makeup was, and in order to compare it to what it is now, don't know much about the quality of the housing stock. But one thing that would make sense to me, that with the Urban Ecology Center in Washington Park now, this becomes an attractive place to live. And I'm sure there's some folks who are speculators who will come in, buy a cheap house, try and fix it up, and then flip it. But I don't think that the person who buys the house is going to be predominantly Caucasian. And there may be a shift in income level that's taking place, whereas I know that the area has always had a good mix of income levels within the neighborhood, which I think is I guess I don't want to say more important than ethnic diversity, but I think it's a better way to ensure ethnic diversity and stability, is to make sure that there are there are housing opportunities for every income level, and that you don't get concentrations of super rich neighborhoods and concentrations of super poor neighborhoods. When you end up with these poles in a community, that's when you start to get your tensions. And when you can mix, at least in my experience and in the readings that I've done, when you can have mixed income levels within a neighborhood, within blocks, that's when you get people living and behaving like they live in community.
I have another 5-7 minutes.
Okay.
Let me just turn it over so you.
Okay.
So tell me, if you would, please, the impression of this neighborhood that exists, both within the community or neighborhood itself, as well as the greater Milwaukee area. And I live in Sheboygan.
Okay.
I'm not really. I mean, I've gotten to know a little bit about how people think about this neighborhood.
Okay.
Through hearsay and stories.
Okay.
And I just wanted to know what the neighborhood residents' own perspective is of the neighborhood that they live in, or its disparate parts, if there are areas that they consider better than others. If you could tell me that, as well as how do people in other parts of Milwaukee perceive that you've noticed or observed or
Okay.
found?
Okay. Again, no specific conversation that I've had with anyone about. No one's ever told me I think this about the Washington Park neighborhood. I know that there's a sense that the neighborhood can be dangerous, and anytime and especially I think there's a sense that Washington Park is dangerous. And that's what people hear in the media. So the only time Washington Park makes the news is when a shooting happens. And those are legitimate causes for concern. But I know that as a resident of the neighborhood, I would say for the most part, I'm going to feel comfortable walking on the street at night. And I can easily, and I can make the case for that and advocate for that to anyone in the city. Because I know that this area is a great place to live, irrespective of which side of the park that you're on. I think there may be a class structure that's perceived about the park when you look at, if you look at west of the park, east of the park, north and south of the park. I think people will say, okay, well, this neighborhood, Washington Heights, that's the best neighborhood to be in. And then maybe Martin Drive, and then maybe Sherman Boulevard, and then this area to the west or to the east, maybe being the least desirable. But when you drive, if you actually take the time and go through the neighborhoods, you can see that they're great places to live. And the key with Milwaukee is that you can't really, you can't judge an area. If you do that, you're going to miss out on some really good things that are happening and great things that are happening. It's block by block, and in cases, it's house by house. And you can pick any block in America, and you can probably find a house where there's something nefarious going on.
Great. I also wanted to ask about the park itself.
Okay.
We, in our interviews, people who live closer to the park figures greatly in their day-to-day life.
Okay.
Is that the case for people who live, at some distance within the same neighborhood, but a few blocks away, or is it? How does this park figure into the community itself?
Okay. I think it's probably, I know what I'm drawn to the park because of activities that are happening in the park. I don't recreate in the park. And it's just not that I have something against recreating in the park. It's just that the life that I lead has me everywhere but home for the most part. But I love to get into the park for the music series at the band shell. I try to get to whatever events that Urban Ecology Center is having. So I think, for me, what draws me into the park are organized activities. And that would be, I live a block and a half from the park, and that would be the case even if I were right across the street from the park. I do worry about the park, the park is bordered by all major streets, which I think are barriers. And unless you have kids who want to come to the play areas in the park, I think it might be difficult, or I wouldn't be surprised if adults find it cumbersome to get into the park.
Okay. We haven't talked about your own house and
Okay.
who lives there. Do you
Okay.
live with someone else, family, your own street life? Do you work in the yard? Do you have a yard? Interaction with neighbors? So please feel free to tell us, or whoever may be
Okay.
listening, whatever you can.
All right, sure. Well, I own a duplex, and I live in the upper unit, and I rent out the lower unit. It's the only house on my block that has a white picket fence, which was kind of interesting, since that's the quintessential American dream, to own a house with a white picket fence. Not that I was ever driven to have a white picket fence, but it came with the house, so okay, I'll embrace it for what it is. What's cool is that the house I grew up in on 33rd Street had a black walnut tree in the backyard. And while I don't have a black walnut tree, my neighbor has a black walnut tree in his backyard. So it's neat to see that theme continuing to run through my life. I don't get to work in my yard as much as I'd like because I stay so busy, and especially now that I've got the farm. Since I'm all about growing food, I definitely feel obligated to have a garden. But since I have a farm, it's the last thing that I want to work on at the end of the day. So it's an interesting fence to walk. But it's a good... I don't know all my neighbors as well as I would like, but again, it's because I don't get to spend as much time in the neighborhood as possible. But I'm comfortable with the relationships that I have with the neighbors who are adjacent to me, as well as the ones who are across the street. So it's definitely a place I enjoy living, and would highly recommend it to others.
Okay, great. Have any questions?
Last question.
Yeah. Is
Okay.
there anything that you would like to say that we haven't covered in the next minute? So,
No, not that I can think of.
okay. We're basically going to be, a couple of groups of us are looking at the food thing.
Okay.
If there is any tips or helpful advice that you could give us, we're basically surveying corner stores and grocery shops.
Okay.
Trying to lay out a map.
Okay. What evaluation instrument are you using to...
We're surveying.
Are you the survey?
Audio survey. Like
Okay.
we have 3 questions, just usual. What do you
Okay.
carry to the store owners? Where do you buy your food from? And what sells at this store?
Okay.
And that's pretty much the questions that we ask customers. Just the last part, what sells in the store, becomes what do you like to buy?
Okay. Okay. I would recommend I would say maybe take that last question and divide it into 2 parts. So what's in the store that you like to buy, and what's not in the store that you would like to buy here.
Actually, yeah, we're asking what were I couldn't remember.
Okay.
The last question was, what do you wish
Okay.
you would be able to buy here?
Okay, great. And then I don't know if you can give me your email, because I've got a evaluation instrument for corner stores that helps develop a rating for the quality of the food that they
Great.
provide. If
Yeah.
you're interested in that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I can tell that to you right now.
Okay.
Can I just record silence?
Sure.
Room sound for about 20 seconds.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you so much
You're
for taking
welcome.
the time. Do you want to note it down, or do you want me to write somewhere?
Why don't you write it on a piece of paper? That'd be-
Yeah, it's.
I
I
have
ran.
one.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I ran out of my
Sorry.
visiting card earlier in the car. Pardon my crappy handwriting.
No worries.
Got so used to typing it.
Okay.
Oh, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually a student of urban studies.
Oh, okay.
I'm taking this course with the architecture department,
Okay, cool.
hence my interest in gentrification.
Oh, okay.
Well, once again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, if you want to, a good study in gentrification is the Grand Avenue Mall.
The Grand Avenue Mall?
Yeah. Look at the history of that and how that project came to life, and what existed, especially the hotels that were down there, that were the week at a time rentals, and the persons using those, and how they were displaced, the promises that were going to be made for the housing that was going to replace that, and then didn't happen.
Okay.
Yeah. And obviously urban renewal that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
That sham.
The mall today is almost closed, the Grand Avenue Mall.
Yeah. It's a fascinating story. I did a project on it for one of my urban planning classes, and I lived through that, but I had forgotten about what actually existed before they built that, and what downtown actually looked like, because it's so different now. And that's all about gentrification.
Cool. So just an informal request here, in the next couple of weeks, if we wanted to talk to someone like yourself, you're very knowledgeable about the food issue.
Sure.
Can we just give you a call sometime?
Mhm.
Maybe set up a time for just like an informal chit chat.
Yeah.
Just, hey, this is what we found. This is what we're looking for. What are your opinions?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.